Okay, so another extra bit we might to add to this character is if we are using this character for some sort of walk cycle, maybe we've got him moving along, we want these antennas to follow along with the head. So the head might be swaying left to right, moving about, so generally we want these antennas to follow along with the head. But as I've said, I've animated with this character before with a previous rig, and one thing I found was if we keep the antennas always locked to the head, then for some like facial animation when he was talking, he was moving his head about and wanted these antennas to stay in the same place, but because they were parented to the head, you know, there's no way to key that on parenting. So what I had to do was the head rotated forward, which rotated these controls with it, so then I had to re-move them back and set a keyframe, which is called like counter animating. So we're countering that movement by adding keyframes, but that's really time consuming and it can be really messy because, you know, these keyframes are going to be quite jittery unless you keep them perfect. So it'll be a lot easier if we just have the head separate, so we can move it about like this. The eyes are separate. The same with these mid antenna controls. We did a follow control earlier on for the follow antenna. So I've switched that to 0. We can see now they're not following. So it just makes it easier for the animator. And depending on which shot you want, you can set it to follow or not, or switch between them. So to do this, what I'm going to do is just hide the mesh. So show, I'm going to uncheck polygons, and I'll show the joints. And we're going to do the same what we did before, is we're going to take this top eye control, and before we do this actually, if we look at the mesh, so I'll bring back polygons, this top mesh here, I don't really want it to rotate around the base of the antenna. I do for the actual base of the antenna, I want that nice rotation in there, but I don't want to rotate the top of the eye around the base of the antenna, because for some animation for this character, I want his eyes to rotate around the centre of the eye, so you could have his eyes locked in place, in space, and then it's as if his whole antenna moves around the eye. So what I would like is some sort of control for the eye that has the same pivot point as the eye, so that way as we rotate we can keep those eyes locked in place and the antenna can be rotating around that point. So with the both eyes selected, I'm just going to go to the local rotative axes, just display that, and I'll make sure I've got show handles, which is local rotative axes. Okay, and all I'm going to do is just create a NURBS curve. So I'll actually hide the polygons, so we can still see the axes of those eyes, we just can't see the mesh. I'll snap that on there and rotate it into place, and just show it again so I can see what I'm working with. Okay, and I'm quite happy with just having this as a circular NURBS curve. Don't want any more detail. I'm going to add a few more curves at the front for the eyelid controls, so I'm going to keep that area sort of clean. But feel free to, you know, create your own curves if you want. And I'll just duplicate that and vert snap to the other eye. With both those selected, I'm just going to delete the history and freeze transformations. Okay, so now what we can do is select these two end antenna controls, press F in the outliner just to see where they are, and they're not in any rotate or offset groups, so I can just straight away take these and parent them to these two controls. But before we do that, I'm just going to move these. So I'm going to select these two, control click control object, and parent it in there, and just rename these CC underscore left eye. And the right eye. Okay, and now we can just parent these as we normally would. And we're not going to get any offset or any values because we've froze the transformations of these. So again, I'm just going to take these controls, object display, drawing overrides, give this the blue for the left and the right for the red. So just doing it as we go along, so we're keeping it consistent. And also I'll hide the local rotative axes of these two spheres because we're done with them at the moment. We don't really need to see them anymore. Okay, so now what happens is, as we rotate the eye control, you can see we're not going to get 100% good results at this point because again we're using this default skinning, and I've kept this duplicate of the mesh we created earlier that we did a bit of skinning with, well, just the default skinning, just so as I'm working with it I can see how it's going to be working. And I can see that rotating this, we're rotating around the eye now. So we can see that if we do eventually, towards the end, improve this skinning, how rotating the eye control is going to rotate the antenna around the actual eyeball. So we'll get that funky sort of movement where his eye's fixed in space and his whole antenna will be rotating around that point. So that's looking good. And again we've got this lower antenna control. Again, it's not really skinned well at the moment, and we're going to add a few joints up here. So the rest of this eye is getting the influence from this joint down here, but we'll still be able to rotate the top of the antenna to just get a bit of an offset, you know, so we can sort of get that tangent we want coming out of the eye. Okay, so now we've got those eye controls. What we actually want to do is get these to follow along with the head. So to do this, I'll just hide the mesh again. And we'll do what we did before. So I'm going to take this eye control, hit Control G, and I'll do the same for the other side. Control G. If we expand these, I'm just going to copy the name and rename this GRP underscore and then off. So we've got those two offset groups, and with these groups we want to be rotating and moving around the head. So instead of the origin, I'm just going to press Insert and Vert Snap to this joint here. Because if you remember, the joint here has the same pivot point as this control, so we can just Vert Snap it there. So I'll take this right side and re-snap the pivot there. Okay, so now we've got the general setup we want. We want it to be rotating around this point down here. And again, we're not going to use a parent constraint, so I'll just show why. If I take this head control here and I parent constrain it to, so I've just got constraint parent, make sure everything's constrained, we get the desired result that as I rotate the head, the antenna is going to follow along. But you can see here, if I select the parent constraint here, so I'm selecting the rotate offset group. If I'll rotate the head first to show this. So if I take this parent constraint and blend it from 1, so it's on, to 0, we can see it snaps. There's no smooth blending in there. And again, you could do this if you want to use a bit of mel, so you can click a mel script that switches it to 0 and then removes the control back. But like we did with the IK FK switches for the arms, I prefer having that blend in there, so the animator has the option they can blend it between the two if they want, or they can use a mel script to snap between the two, or instantly switch between the two but preserve the position. So I like to give the animator the choice. So I'm just going to undo that to the point where we don't have that parent constraint anymore. Okay, so we're going to do what we did before, which is we'll create this tie control. So I'll go into front view and just snap this tie control, and I will center the pivot on that and vert snap it to this joint, and then delete the history freeze transformations and rename this tie underscore, and what will we call this? This is the head follow because we're going to be using this on the head control. Okay, so with this we take the head control, click the tie control, go to constraint and parent. So now any transformations or rotations this head control does, it's going to relay that information to the tie control, and it's also going to do that if, for instance, we rotated this lower body control. We don't have any translates or rotates directly on this head control, but on the tie control we can see it's taking those values still. So this way it's going to rotate the antenna no matter what control we rotate. And as we create this tie control, I'm just going to go to Windows, render it as Hypershade. And we'll go to Graph, Add Selected to Graph. I'll just move this off to the side here, because if we remember, we put the tie controls in the extra to hide group. So if I just bring that up, extra nodes, extra to hide, and if you remember with the global control, we actually made, if we can find it in here, so down here, we actually made a group for the tie controls because we needed to apply a parent and a scale constraint. So these tie controls still work with the global controls, you know, movements and scales. So when we put this tie control in here, we need to remember we need to add it to its specific group, which is this global tie group. So I'm just going to middle mouse click and drag that in there. So now as we scale this rig up, that tie control will follow along. Okay, so we'll do the same as we've done in the previous tutorials with these antennas and the arms to get that, and the head when we did the head follow. We're just going to do the same setup. So we take this curve here, I'm going to select these two curves, edit, add attribute, head follow, give it a minimum of 0, maximum of 1, a default of 0, add that in. Go graph, add selected to graph to add these two curves. And I'm going to select these two curves here, press up to select their offset groups, and just go graph, add selected to graph. And bring these back down here. So we're doing the same before. We want this tie control to take its translate and rotate values and input it into these two groups. And we split them up into two groups because we might have a time where we want one antenna to follow along the head and we want one antenna to stay behind. So splitting it into left and right, we can, you know, control them individually. So I'm just going to type blend to bring up the blend colour. I'm just going to create 4. So I'll put 2 on the left, 2 on the right, or the left and right. So again here I'm sort of arranging it, which makes sense to the viewport, but again remember we're doing it from the character's left, so I'm looking from the front, so actually this side of the graph is the character's right hand side. Okay, so I'm going to take the eye control, drag and drop onto these. I'm just going to take that head follow and put it into the blender. And then do the same, reload right, put it into the blender. Take the left control, reload left, and take its head follow and put it back into these two blenders as well. So now these two custom attributes, head follow, controls the blender of these. And just selecting these blend colours, I'm just going to set all these colour 1 and colour 2 to 0. Okay, so now I can just get so right click on the bottom right hand corner, translate, put that into the colour 1, take the rotate, put that into the, oops, we want this to make sure I didn't do that. I'll try that again, take the rotate and put it into the second blend colours, colour 1. And then do the same on the opposite side. because they're both rotating from the same control, the same head control. Colour 1, and then take the rotate, colour 1. Okay. And then, last but not least, take the output. That was the translate. Take the output again into the rotate. Same on the other side, take the output, translate, output, rotate. So basically, if the blend is set to 1, we take the colour 1 value, which is the translate and rotate information of the tie control, which in turn is taking its values from the position of the head. So when it's set to 1, we're telling these controls basically to rotate and move to the position of the head. And then if we put the blender to 0, taking colour 2, which is just 0, which is no effect, we're getting no rotation in there, so the antenna's going to stay behind. Okay, so I'll move that to the side and we'll just test this. So I'll set these head follows to 1, rotate the head, select these controls again, and you can see moving from head follow from 0 to 1, we're getting that nice blending in there. And if you do want it to preserve the pose, you can do a bit of mel scripting where you query the rotation or query the pivots of these, set the head follow to 0, and then snap them back, you know, like with a set at a command. But I just prefer having this blend in there as well. Okay, and the good thing about this is because the follow antenna for the mid controls, if you remember, we had a point constraint between these two, so it gets to the mid position, and also an aim constraint, so it aims to the top control. You can see that now, as we rotate this about, if we have the mid antennas follow on, it's going to follow the midpoint and rotate the top, so it's essentially following along with the whole head movement antenna, if these top controls are following the head. And we can set that to 0, and you can see how the top's following and the middles aren't. So this gives full control of the animator, because basically they can rotate the head and they can decide which of these antenna controls is going to follow the head. And we still have the ability to move this and keep that mid position there. So you can see how we can get to follow the head and then still make this mid position, this mid control, follow the mid position, and all the translates and rotates are free, so we can just easily get a position in there that we want. And also, because we use that tie control, it's going to follow whatever control we rotate down up the hierarchy. Even though it's not directly putting any translate values in here, it's still going to follow along, so it's all working together. Okay, cool. So I'm just going to undo that and get back to the default pose. Okay, so now there's not really a whole lot left to do. We've got the character following about. Different things can follow each other. The antennas can follow each other. Now all we really need to do is probably refine these arms a bit more. So here you can see moving these FK controls. The wrist isn't following along, so we need to sort that out. And then probably start on adding some eye controls. And then we're going to finish this tutorial off, so it's pretty much done, and then we're going to move on to the facial animation. So we're going to finish up the entire body controls and the body setup, and then do the facial animation as sort of a separate training kit. So we're going to follow on. So the facial animation is going to start pretty much with the end of this rigging series, so we can go from start to finish through a whole character.